Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The recent WhatsApp policy update sent the social media world into a frenzy, with lots of people questioning what all this was about and how much of our privacy was compromised. So this little episode entitled "The WhatsApp Controversy" is a little bit about the background information on what we should know as everyday users of social media platforms such as WhatsApp and others, and if there is something that should really concern us and put us on the edge of our seats or not. So join us on the other side of our introductory video for a little bit of the background information and practical tips on what we can do.
Alright, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're back after our little intro. And one of the great ironies of this episode is, of course, it's being live streamed on Facebook. Fantastic. Yep. Okay, but we're talking about more than just WhatsApp, right? That's one issue that's hogged the spotlight recently. But the whole sort of minefield, so to speak, of cybersecurity is the playground within which the WhatsApp issue arises. So I think it's important that we explore that landscape a little more generally as well.
Yep.
But okay, let's start with the WhatsApp issue. What got everyone into a frenzy?
So basically it's the most recent policy update from WhatsApp. And instead of beating around the bush with this one, we might actually just get the old policy up, the 2019 policy, which talks about, I was meant to be able to see the screen with this one, but basically the part of the policy which talks about end-to-end encryption. Right, so it was both in 2018 and 2019. There were a series of videos that were released. There was a policy update, and the big thing for WhatsApp was that it boasted about end-to-end encryption. One end being the sender of message or a call or whatever it is, and the other person being the receiver.
Okay.
And basically, that encryption just means that your message becomes coded and it's unable to be read by any other party in between except the one who sent it and the one who receives it.
So not even WhatsApp themselves?
Not even WhatsApp themselves. That's the old policy in 2019. So basically what causes the frenzy is this update to WhatsApp's privacy policy, in which it says that it is going to be sharing some of this information with its parent company, Facebook. And it does send social media into a bit of a frenzy, part of which I think is justified and a lot of which I think is just social media hype.
Yeah, just like hype on hype. And
it's just a lot of hype.
It's gotten traction and then it just gets bigger and snowballs like that. But so, okay, let's specify then what's the problem? Like is it the encryption that's gone? Is it something else? What's actually in this mysterious new privacy policy, which apparently is like 4,000 words long and unreadable?
Yep.
What's the actual problem? What are the takeaway points?
There was a cybersecurity expert. I was watching a couple of videos just before this podcast. There was a cybersecurity expert by the name of Arthur, I forget his last name, in South Africa.
Yep.
He was on the NBC network as a guest expert, and he was along the same lines of what you've mentioned, saying that it is quite indecipherable in terms of if you do go to the policy as an everyday user, you can't actually get the gist of what's being said. But to break it down, not that I'm an expert, but he broke it down a little bit, saying that essentially what's happening is that some of the data that's being collected by WhatsApp things such as your IP address, things such as your purchase history, things such as your location, and a few other things as well, which all add up, right, are being shared with Facebook for the purposes of basically monetary purposes, for the purposes of targeted advertising, and so forth. Things that, bring in the bucks for Facebook. And so I think it's worth discussing how much of that should scare us and how much of that is just, this is a lot of it's just the new normal. And so there's nothing really to, at least in this particular policy update, there's nothing really to set you on edge. There's nothing particularly alarming about it,
Is that what you would say about this, or is that sort of just exploring?
I think that's the first thing. Like, that's the first thing. I think if this is what's alarmed you, then you don't know everything else that has come before it. It's like, I don't know, if you put it in political terms, it's like if a country was to wage war on a weaker country for 20 years, and one particular incursion absolutely, becomes the headline and it becomes entirely alarming across the world. You'd think they've been at war and they've killed and they've pillaged for 20 years, and this one incursion isn't really, it's concerning. It's particularly concerning. And it's concerning, like, to be fair to people who are somewhat alarmed by it, it is one further, I think, what's the word?
Encroachment.
Yeah, encroachment, into the private world of the end user. In the sense that we perhaps acknowledged, accepted, consented to Facebook that, it became social media / advertising. But WhatsApp was meant to be this entirely private thing. In fact, and we'll just go to a quick 30-second video on this as well before I come back to your thoughts. That's the way that WhatsApp boasted itself as well in 2018, 2019 in its old policy update. If we can just get a quick look, it's a 30-second video of WhatsApp and it boasting its end-to-end encryption. If we can just play that. Yeah, so it's one of those, nifty sort of cartoon animated type, everyone's happy and these two people have been able to catch each other in terms of sending their location and the little surveillance camera. They're trying to show that, nothing is being shared with anyone except yourself, as a sender and with the person who's the receiver. So end-to-end encryption, right? You'd have to decrypt it, I think is the term.
And apparently decryption is notoriously difficult. Like even cybersecurity experts and whatnot find it difficult, agencies as well, to actually decrypt.
Like you need to be an expert hacker to be able to do that. So that is some serious... look, I'm not going to feign expertise over the details of that encryption, open source versus other types of encryption. You might know a little bit more about that.
Not much.
But with regards to practical tips, which I'll come to later on, because I know you have some of those for our users. But I'll come to you for the practical tips later on. Let's leave those to the end. But before we get to that, what are your thoughts?
We'll get to the impractical tips.
No, we'll just get to the general discussion before we move to the practical stuff, right? About... with all this data collection and data being shared, what do you think is concerning to the end user? Like, why is it an issue? Who cares if it's being shared? What would you say?
WhatsApp, or are we talking generally?
Generally, let's talk generally, and we'll come to WhatsApp.
Oh, all right, no worries.
Specifically.
Look, for me, I think it's about patterns. I think that there's two areas that you can, or spheres rather, that you can look at it from. I think one is commercial, and the other is more concerning, which is government. Let's talk about commercial first. Commercial is exploitation of patterns and trends in markets, in psychology, in purchasing, in what people want, trends, all that kind of thing, in order to, as you said before, like targeted advertising, and basically just to make more money off people, but using that data in order to drive that.
Yeah.
So, if someone knows that, you and I like a particular product and they can pitch that to us, we're more likely to buy it, right? Now, if that person's got access to millions of people's data where they can then track these patterns and things and say, all right, we know we can sell this in this way to make, X amount of profit, whatever else, right? It's, you can question...
Is that an issue? Like in and of itself, ethically, is that an issue?
I think that's just the way the world works at the moment. Is it necessarily a bad thing? Look, I don't necessarily care much about targeted advertising, but I'm a prolific online shopper, so my data's probably all over the place already, credit card details and everything. So perhaps they're already somewhat embedded and invested in that system.
Yep.
If I get a targeted ad for something that I want, I usually don't question why did that ad come to me. Well, then again, I usually don't do ads. I do my own research, find whatever I need. But I don't see that as that much of a problem. Now, if you look at it from the broader ideological angle of capitalism and the way that it sets up societies and corporations and how they run the show, then yeah, you can definitely have a problem with that from that ideological angle, right? Corporations.
But otherwise, it's pretty much like, back in the days when you open a bank account and you start all of a sudden getting these telemarketing calls.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's data that they've collected and they've started targeting their advertising back in the days as well. It's like a much more evolved, much more developed form of that. But it would obviously lead and have certain consequences.
Yeah. Look,
what are the consequences that should concern us?
Commercially?
Yeah. No. And
Okay.
more ethically, ideologically.
So ethically and ideologically, I think it's just pointing to this reality of corporations. And the thing is, I was watching a really interesting little video from he was the head of data intelligence, something along I can't remember exactly the title, from Oxford University. It was a professor who was mentioning that, when you look at markets, right, the way that markets work, the way that markets balance themselves out is innovation, right? If someone's got a better product, then they will come into the market and more customers will gravitate towards it. It'll balance things out.
Yep.
But what he was saying was, now you've got this situation where innovation is driven by data, right? And who's got the data? The Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons, the Netflix, all those few companies, right? They've got all the data. And so they're the ones who are going to be able to innovate because everyone else doesn't have that. And when they can do that, they can just continue to monopolize the market. And then you get these huge corporations that run God knows how many aspects of people's lives.
It still seems like an economic, if not, it still seems like a commercial and an economic critique in terms of exploitation of the market.
Yeah, but
is there something beyond that?
Okay, I think
you mentioned
that's where we then delve into the potential dangers of the governmental side of things, not necessarily the ideological, although you can't really separate them. But when it comes to government, then that's where things get more sus, right? That's when things get more suspicion. That's when you start looking at, if you're projecting dystopian futures, totalitarian governments, so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
That's when you have this Orwellian setup. And to be frank, you've already got aspects of that in the world in places like China and the oppression of Muslims that occurs, and even in the Muslim world, right? Data is used to track, monitor, and shape populations. And
surveillance, it's a literal connection between surveillance that leads to concentration camps.
Yeah. A very direct link. And that might not even need a smartphone, although that would be aiding their job. But you've got facial recognition, tracking, and then, in fact, I think you've got mandatory. Yes, I remember watching a video of the oppression of Muslims in northern China where mandatory stops where they had to plug in their phone and the security agencies would get a carbon copy of everything that was on it, right? So that's their data. And then that data is definitely used to imprison, to put into concentration camps, to harass, oppress, and so forth. So that's where it becomes a lot more concerning. And what could potentially happen is the move from the commercial to that governmental side of things, the political side of things. It takes one piece of legislation to be enacted and bang, suddenly that data becomes...
Yeah, I'm going to stop you there.
Purpose.
I wanted to, if we can play, there was a little trailer that we came across while we were putting this podcast together, which is a dramatization as trailers are. It was theatrical dramatization type. So obviously epic and probably We'll talk about how much it accords with how dramatic the reality is as well. But let's have a little watch of this. Yep.
Who has seen an advertisement that has convinced you that your microphone is listening to your conversations? All of your interactions, your credit card swipes, web searches, locations, likes, they're all collected in real time into a $1 trillion a year industry.
The real game changer was Cambridge Analytica. They worked the Trump campaign and the Brexit campaign. They started using information warfare.
Cambridge Analytica claimed to have 5,000 data points on every American voter.
I started tracking down all these Cambridge Analytica ex-employees.
Someone else that you should be calling committees, Brittany Kaiser.
Brittany Kaiser, once a key player inside Cambridge Analytica, casting herself as a whistleblower.
The reason why Google, Facebook are the most powerful companies in the world is because last year data surpassed oil in value. Data is the most valuable asset on Earth. We targeted those whose minds thought we could change until they saw the world the way we wanted them to. I know that the targeting tool was considered a weapon.
There is a possibility that the American public has been experimented on.
This is becoming a criminal matter. When people see the extent of the surveillance, I think they're going to be shocked.
And I still fear for your life. Yeah, the powerful people that are involved. But I can't keep quiet just because it makes powerful people mad.
Data rights should be considered just fundamental rights.
So I think that's the end. I did cut off the last part of those some inappropriate scenes and stuff. But I think, Hamza, that if we're in America, right, where you've got your headquarters of Google, of Facebook, of a lot of the big corporations, where a lot of the lawsuits to do with these big corporations take place, like with the Cambridge Analytica scandal with Facebook, where they were siphoning off information to in a scandalous way to these data collecting organization, and that in some way was facilitating the sort of manufacturing of public opinion with regards to the election in America. That was a huge scandal, right? I think not just students of law or students to do with civil rights protection, whatever else, or people in those fields, authors and stuff, but just the general public as well. If you're in America and you're sort of in the eye of the storm, I feel like you might feel and the drama of it will resonate with you a lot more, like how dramatic this is and how epic this is in terms of the encroachment of privacy, especially because you're in the headquarters of sort of the free world, the whole democracy. It's a huge, we're all free, and privacy is a big thing. You know, your access to data is protected. It's a part of freedom, right? In the West, it's huge. It's what they've sort of championed part of democracy of freedom. In Australia, I think part of the fact where that sort of meh attitude comes from, in terms of what are we going to do about it, is that we're isolated politically as well.
We're
definitely isolated politically.
Very different reality here.
How do you sort of bring those two together? How are we meant to reconcile that? Like, I think if we were there, we'd feel the necessity to respond to this a little bit more, maybe a lot more. We're geographically isolated, we're politically isolated from the problem, and as a result, I think a lot of the attitude has become whatever. Just whatever goes.
Look, I think if you look at the Cambridge Analytica scandal, right, without getting into the depth and detail of it all, basically the Trump administration got access to, I think it was roughly 87 million Facebook users' data.
Yes.
Which is huge. 87 million people. Like, that's enough to potentially, right, obviously with a million caveats, swing an election or something like that, right? Like, that's huge. That's politically enormous. We've not faced something like that here, but I have no doubt that these corporations are still operating in potentially insidious ways with their data here as well, right?
100%.
Because at the end of the day, it's not as though they actually care about your privacy. At the end of the day, they care about dollars. And if privacy policies, as loose as they may be or however they may be, it creates a sense of security in the user and then they use the product, they'll do it. But it's just a matter of convenience for them. It's not like they actually care about you and blah, blah, blah. It's just because people are concerned about privacy. So privacy is the product, so to speak. That's what sells. And so if you can say that, yep, my product's got privacy, then people will use it. Because it's just a sort of, as you were saying, it's something that people want. People want access to, or not access to, but people want their privacy to be assured.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely agree that we are somewhat insulated here. And you're right, it has led to a bit of a meh attitude.
Yeah.
And let's potentially interrogate that a little more. Like, what does that attitude actually mean? Like, one thing for me is that, and I recognize that, you know, there's opposition to this potential stance as well. But if you want to download the alternative to WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, right? Elon Musk and Edward Snowden, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, tweeted about Signal after all this WhatsApp controversy.
Yeah.
If you want to download them, you got to get them from Google, or you got to get them from Apple.
Yeah.
Who, you know, once you've got that phone in your hand,
Yes.
have all your data
Absolutely.
anyway. And look, I'm not suggesting that it's a case of like, yep, they've got the data, so just go ahead and do whatever else. It doesn't really matter.
But I see what you're saying as well, because
irony.
because for anyone to kick up a storm about what's happening now, and they're using a smartphone
Yeah.
or they're on Facebook, which is, I would guess 95% of people who are kicking up a storm
Yeah.
are on Facebook
Already.
or at least are using a smartphone.
Yeah, so it's like WhatsApp is going to, like, the major issue with the WhatsApp thing was that they're going to share your information with Facebook. You probably should have mentioned that earlier, but that was the key issue. Your location data, your profile picture, some of your information, even your contact lists, phone number. So a decent chunk of info was now going to be
Maybe we can
accessible
see
to
while
Facebook.
you talk, I don't want to cut you off too much, but just the image of what kind of data is collected from WhatsApp.
So that's the kind of information that was now going to be able to be shared with not just Facebook, but the Facebook group of companies, which includes things like Instagram, right?
Yep.
But you'd wager that many of the people using WhatsApp also have Facebook and Instagram. So it's kind of a case of, well, if you've already got your information there, is it that much of a concern? But at the same time, you don't want to breed a sense of apathy that, yeah, well, whatever, they've got my details, so, you know, what, it doesn't hurt.
100%.
You know, it's fine, it's totally okay.
Look, as a Muslim community, let me take the conversation in a slightly more focused angle. A Muslim community that lives as a minority in the West, which is hostile towards the Muslim community, which has been surveilled in the past, we know. Our very last episode on this was all about harassment from ASIO and other security forces. And what that means for us and measures we can take. And all that. We know there's a certain history. We don't need to look at the Muslim war. That's a lot worse in terms of how bad and how hostile that situation is in terms of surveillance and stuff. But even in the West, Muslims are viewed as hostile subjects. Islam, at the very least, is used as a hostile subject. And your subscription to it is not in accordance with, you know, Western values and stuff. You already stand out like a sore thumb. There's already surveillance. Where they get a chance to surveil, it might not be every single Muslim in the community, but anywhere they feel that there's some bit of tension, they'll sort of hone in on that. Given that this is the context, right, that there is surveillance and it has harmed us in the past, I feel like we shouldn't take that attitude of just, whatever. We've already got a smartphone. And you know, just to be completely honest about this, both of us have smartphones, and we have probably given permission to a whole host of everything in the past.
Google apps, this, that.
But that's not to say that I haven't, you know, been alarmed by some of the, you know, Muslim prayer apps, passes on data to whatever. You know, everyone quickly jumped on to delete that app or find an alternate app. And at the same time, when I do go through those sort of download the app and give permission, I do
just double check.
I do double check and say, do I need to tick this box and say. But the sad thing is, if the phone is telling me I need to tick the box,
then you're going to tick the
box. I'll tick the box. Like with WhatsApp, you know, it's very timely. I think today is the last day. Today is the day in which they no longer allow you to access WhatsApp unless you've updated it. 8th of February, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So unless you've updated your WhatsApp, which for me was a routine process.
Yeah, didn't even think twice.
I didn't think twice about it. I think it just went through the thing. But just saying, like, as hosts of this podcast, right? We're talking about it. We're conscious of it. But it's so pervasive that I think some practical tips would be good.
Yeah.
Some practical tips in terms of what we could do.
I think it is certainly warranted that we think about it seriously. Like, we look, it's one thing to sort of go the whole 9 yards, say delete the app, get rid of it. And look, some may feel that that's the course of action that they need to take. But on the other end, being completely apathetic, I don't think is really the best approach because, as you've mentioned, right, like we've had issues in the past with the Australian government and metadata. Like George Brandis having to explain what metadata is when he clearly didn't have
know
a
it
clue
himself. Yeah.
because under anti-terror legislation, now telecommunications companies had to keep and potentially hand over metadata. That became a really big issue. A really big issue because that metadata could include things like your location, right? It could include, not necessarily your messages, but the time that you sent whatever it might be. And that's data that, what do they need that for? And that was purely for the purposes of surveillance and everything else. So
that exclamatory remark from me was just, I just got a notification about needing to update the phone and stuff. So
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, no, he wasn't.
Did I get that?
No, he wasn't the cricket or anything. No. It was that notification. So I just thought
very timely. Did you deny or accept?
I let it slide off. I thought I'd get back to it after your advice.
No pressure. I will see exactly what you do and report to everyone afterwards.
Yeah, 5 for 243.
What was I saying? You threw me off. So I think, look, should you delete the app? Should you delete WhatsApp? Should you get an alternative? Should you get Telegram, Signal, whatever? Like, I'm not necessarily going to say yes, no. It's really up to the person themselves that they feel comfortable with.
What if I propose to you that, look, if you have any reason that you feel you might need a little bit of extra security, like for example, there are certain conversations, like, I don't know, you might be researching something as part of your law degree or as part of like where you feel that, you know what, it might be better
just to be safe.
To be safe, right? To I don't know, for your specific circumstances, it might be better to shift over to Signal because of its open source encryption.
But
right?
let's like just another dimension to this, perhaps, is to, and I understand it might sound a little superficial, but the convenience factor, which is that you could go to Telegram, Signal, whatever, and if no one's there or not many are there that you want to communicate with, then it doesn't really serve the purpose that you need, right? You've got to actually get people in groups migrating
and
to
I know what you're
other
saying.
apps.
It's not a superficial point. It's not like I just want to have some fun on WhatsApp. It's like your family WhatsApp group, my work group is used to be all on Telegram, right? The whole thing.
Apparently Telegram's okay though, so that's all good.
Apparently it's only the secret chat that is open source encrypted.
Okay.
It's only a section of Telegram that's safe. Otherwise it's almost identical to WhatsApp. And apparently security wise it's Signal. That's the go-to app.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. But like it's a day-to-day thing. Like, you're not going to know what's happening with your family, possibly, because of the fact that you've potentially decided to get rid of WhatsApp. And then that can become a bit of an issue. It is a real practical consideration when you think about the convenience. And as of now, everyone's still on WhatsApp. Now, it's not that I've got any particular brand loyalty to WhatsApp. I couldn't care less about the platform, right? But it's a convenient thing for me to have. If everyone tomorrow migrated to another service, I'd jump along.
Yeah.
But the question then arises, should I be the one to jump along or should I be the one to try and initiate the move?
Yeah.
And I guess that's where, one's opinion about the extent of the issue and how serious it is really comes into play.
I think the way I'd personally summarize it is that I don't think there's cause, especially if you've got a smartphone and you've given all sorts of permissions in the past. There's no major immediate cause out of this latest update for you to, have a mass exodus of you and your two friends, not you, but like your little clan.
You'd be one of them, I think.
Your little clan to just migrate across to Signal or whatever, right? But I do think that at the same time, don't let that meh attitude sort of go so next level that you absolutely don't care what app you've got and what permission you're giving. And you're like, they're all watching us anyway, so you may as well just, take pictures of yourself compromising photos and send them across to the rest of the world.
But like, I'm pretty sure Google's got a copy of my digital DNA. I'm sure they could reconstruct me in some way, shape, or form if I was to, if I was to perish tomorrow. They'd be able to reconstruct almost everything, all my emails, they've got that.
Yep.
But yeah, you're right. We shouldn't just say, nah, that's it. Let's just give everything now.
Yeah. Might leave it at that.
Yeah.
A simple. We don't have that tech expertise necessarily to get into the nitty gritty of it, but I do think it helps us to, take this with a grain of caution in terms of how we move forward. Don't be too liberal about it all. At the same time, not necessarily the kind of hysterical frenzy that social media has led us to believe in terms of those YouTube videos, why you should delete WhatsApp right now. So it's nothing like that.
I love the clickbait titles. They're fantastic.
But all the best, and join us on WhatsApp, Telegram, and Signal. No, jokes. We'll see you guys.
We only use the head of the compromised corporation,
Facebook.
which is Facebook itself,
and Instagram.
Yes, and which is part of the Facebook family.
Absolutely.
So wonderful. So I guess it makes sense for us to keep WhatsApp.
Yeah. So join us in a couple of weeks from now, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll leave you on that note. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.